Scene 1. Latin Intruders and Selectividad. Hello, this is Dr. Martz, M-A-R-T-Z. Today I want to begin with a short list of English words. This is not a vocabulary lesson and it is not a spelling drill. It is a historical puzzle. The reason for this episode is a call I received from Diego about 2 hours ago while he was preparing for his Selectividad exam. And his question turns out to be just as relevant for native speakers of English as it is for advanced Spanish speakers. Let's first read the words exactly as they appear on the screen. Receipt, debt, doubt, subtle, indict, salmon, good. Now let me give the Spanish equivalents out loud, simply as a spelling mirror, not as a teaching exercise. Receipt is recibo, debt is deuda, doubt is duda, subtle is sutil, indict in legal usage corresponds to acusar, salmon is salmón. This list is not exhaustive. If you want the longer list and the extra notes, I'll leave a PDF right underneath the video as usual. Now we have the full set. Let's briefly return to the penultimate word on the screen, indict. English also has the verb accuse, which is used both in everyday and legal contexts. Indict is more specific. It refers to the formal legal act, and an indictment is the formal charge issued by a prosecutor. In Spanish, both the everyday act and the formal charge usually stay within the same lexical family, acusar and acusación. So here the two languages divide the legal register slightly differently. But look at the list as a whole. Visually, most of these English words are very close to their Spanish counterparts. The letter shapes are clearly related across the two languages. When we pronounce them in English, however, something remarkable happens. Several letters that are clearly written are not pronounced at all. In Spanish, spelling and sound are usually loyal to each other. If a letter is written, you expect to hear it. In English, in words like these, that expectation breaks. So the real question is not how to pronounce them. The real question is why those extra letters are there at all. And the answer takes us straight into the Renaissance and into a deliberate reshaping of English spelling. Coming back once more to Diego's call, what struck me was how simply he framed it. He said he knew this probably went beyond what Selectividad would directly ask, but the pattern bothered him. He had seen the four forms grouped together in his preparation materials: doubt, about, shout, gout, and he checked that the pronunciation was consistent across the set. Then he focused on the one word already on our screen, doubt, and asked the only question that really matters here. Not how to say it, but why the extra letter is written at all. He already knew the B is silent. What he wanted was the reason. That question takes us out of exam technique and into language history. In the next segment, we will track where these letters came from, when they were inserted, and why spelling and speech in English began to move on different timelines. English, in that sense, has to be learned twice, once for the page and once for the ear. And that is not a flaw, but a historical record written into the words themselves. Scene 2. Triplex Lingua and the Renaissance Reshaping of English Spelling. This is exactly the point where Diego asked me, very thoughtfully, if I could elaborate a bit more on the historical context. He said that now he understands that some letters are written but not pronounced, but he would like to know when this happened and how such spellings could enter the language at all. And as we are setting this up, I can see that Ronny is joining the video call as well. Perfect timing. He says he is listening in and will quiz you alongside Diego in the next segment. So stay with us for just a few more minutes. First, here is the historical layer behind these spellings. In the late Middle Ages, roughly 500 to 1500 CE, and especially during the Renaissance, about 1350 to 1600 CE, European scholarship operated within a framework often called the triplex lingua, the three sacred languages. These were Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Hebrew was regarded as the language of divine revelation in the Old Testament. Greek was revered as the language of the New Testament and of classical philosophy. Latin, although the least sacred of the three in theological rank, became the most usable scholarly language across Western Europe. The Renaissance, a word that literally means rebirth, meaning the rebirth of classical antiquity, marked a period in which scholars deliberately turned back to ancient sources in literature, philosophy, science, and law. This revival strengthened the authority of the classical languages and reinforced the prestige of Latin as the working language of learning. Hebrew and Greek were treated as languages of origin and authority, but they were not practical as shared everyday scholarly languages across Europe. Hebrew was tied to specific religious traditions and was not widely used in administration or universities. Greek, although highly respected, had limited reach in Western European institutions before the expansion of Greek studies in the later Renaissance. Latin, by contrast, was already established as the language of universities, law, theology, and science. By around 1200 to 1600 CE, Latin functioned as the main written medium of educated communication across borders. It was the language of grammarians, printers, scholars, and legal institutions. Latin did not merely serve communication, it also functioned as a model of correctness and intellectual legitimacy. Writing that visibly reflected Latin structure and vocabulary was considered more learned and more trustworthy. During the Renaissance, especially in the 15th and 16th centuries, this reverence for Latin intensified through humanist scholarship and the spread of printing after about 1450. Editors and printers increasingly treated Latin as a benchmark. Vernacular languages, such as English, were often viewed as historically mixed and structurally unstable by comparison. This attitude had direct consequences for spelling. English had developed through multiple historical layers, including Old English, Norse contact, and strong French influence after 1066. Pronunciation continued to change over time, but spelling began to stabilize under print culture. At the same time, scholars and printers started to reshape English spelling so that words more visibly reflected their Latin etymons. Letters were restored or inserted to signal learned ancestry, even when those letters were no longer pronounced. These were deliberate scholarly interventions. The written form of a word was expected to display its classical pedigree, even if everyday speech had already simplified the sound pattern. This process was driven mainly by educated elites between roughly 1450 and 1650, not by ordinary speakers. Once these spellings were fixed in printed books, dictionaries, and legal documents, they became standard. Pronunciation continued to evolve, but orthography remained conservative. The result is the modern situation. English spelling preserves layers of medieval and Renaissance scholarly intervention, while pronunciation reflects later sound change. The gap between writing and speech is therefore historical, not chaotic. It is a visible record of the period in which Latin, the most usable of the three sacred languages, reshaped how English words were written. Cut and hand over to Ronny.
Scene 3. Ronny Caruso's Hardflip Quiz. Yo, finally. Ronny here. No disrespect to the professor and his sacred language power combo, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, triplex, lingua, full Renaissance mode, but it's kind of nice not to show up only in the outro, or with a countdown clock and suspicious wires. This time I actually get a real scene, with words, historic moment, market. And did you catch what he said a minute ago, learned? Because that's a beautiful little linguistic kickflip right there. We've got two forms, a learned scholar, that's L-E-R nid, but I learned it yesterday, that's learned, same spelling and different sound and different job, like me before a hard flip and after a hard flip, same skater, different reality. Alright, quiz mode, Diego is already on the screen, I can see him, and since he asked the dangerous historical questions, he's in. You're in too. I'll give you multiple choice questions, A, B, C, or D, and you post the letter sequence in the comments. No overthinking, no Renaissance committee, just commit and roll. Maybe you beat Diego. That part's open. With you, we'll see. Ready? Let's drop in. Question 1. I'll go easy on you first. Just a warm-up line. Which language was not considered sacred by scholars in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance period? A. Hebrew B. Gaelic C, Latin D, Greek lock it in. First instinct, best skate line. Question 2. Rolling. Which language is associated with the New Testament? A. Hebrew B, Latin C, Greek D, Yiddish. Pick your letter. Commit to the trick. Sequence matters. Question 3. Slightly spicier. Still writable. Which function did Latin not serve between about 1200 and 1600? A. Main written language of universities and scholarship. B. Cross-border language of law and educated communication. C. Everyday spoken language of the general population. D. Model of correctness and intellectual legitimacy. One of these is the fake friend. Spot it and roll. Question 4. Timeline precision now. Which earlier languages influenced English both before and after 1066? A. Old Norse and French. Latin and French C. Greek and Latin D. Old English and Hebrew. Only one pair matches the historical layering the professor described. As Kierkegaard puts it, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. Good news, this quiz goes forwards. And listen, the professor just did it again. Learned ancestry, L-E-R need. Not learned ancestry. Adjective form. Scholarly mode. Yes, I'm listening. Final one. Big idea check. According to what the professor said, which factor does not account for the gap between English spelling and pronunciation? A. Educated scholars and printers, reshaping spellings to show Latin ancestry. B. Spelling stabilizing under printing and written standardization. C. Pronunciation continuing to change later through sound change. D. Random chaos, and people just spelling however they feel. One of these is the myth. The others are the real mechanism. Lock your full answer sequence now. Alright, I'm out. I'm heading to Echo Park as soon as I find my white Air Force Ones. Very Socratic situation, honestly. Wisdom begins when you admit you don't know where your shoes are. Kierkegaard would call that subjective truth. I call it a search operation. I'm going skating, aiming for a third straight win. Football calls that a hat trick. Skating still needs a better word. I'll invent one on the way. And there's a 2026 article on Kierkegaard I still want to read. Wouldn't miss Kierke for the world. Kierkegaard makes you feel like an expert, by the way, which is slightly dangerous because, as the professor says, real experts risk knowing more and more about less and less until one day they know everything about nothing. Roll out. Outro.